me. My apologies for the tech issues that after all this time online never seem to go away. So hello, everyone. Just thanks again for joining us on this webinar here about careers at the U.S. Department of State. We're so excited to have you here and to be able to talk about this. You're going to be talking to a couple of people who are big fans of careers at the Department of State. So I'm looking forward to a good conversation tonight. I'd also like to thank the National Society of High School Scholars for this opportunity and for their continued partnership. My name is Molly Kress, and I work in the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, or ECA, in Washington, D.C. I am the Program Officer for the National Security Language Initiative for Youth, or NSLY. NSLY is a language and cultural exchange program for U.S. high school students to study critical languages overseas for a summer or an academic year. ECA, my bureau, offers many fully funded study abroad opportunities for American high school students like yourselves, and I encourage you to explore these exchanges at exchanges.state.gov/highschool. And we'll have lots of information about that as we go along in our conversation tonight. I also invite you and your families to consider hosting an international high school exchange student. The Department of State brings extraordinary high school exchange students from all over the world, nearly 60 countries, to attend American public high schools and live with families in communities in all 50 states. And this is just a really terrific experience. So just really encourage you all to think about it. Hosting an international student is a way to bring the world into your home and a great opportunity to build connections and exchange perspectives across cultures. The benefits of hosting to both the host family and the exchange student are immense, and you can learn more at hosting.state.gov. I have a good friend who considers his host brother his real brother and is actually godfather to his host brother's children. So these can be lifelong connections and relationships. Okay, so first, a few words about the Department of State. It is the country's oldest cabinet department, as I'm sure you all know. It is led by the Secretary of State and is responsible for U.S. foreign policy and international affairs. The first Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson, and he oversaw a small office of 4 clerks, 1 translator, and 1 messenger. They maintained 2 diplomatic posts, 1 in London and 1 in Paris, and 10 consular posts. Now, today, more than 230 years later, the department includes about 13,000 members of the Foreign Service, 11,000 civil service employees, and 45,000 locally employed staff at more than 270 diplomatic missions worldwide. We'll talk more about the Foreign Service and civil service, what the differences are, what they're both about. But I do want to emphasize that our local staff are such an integral part of our missions overseas, and we really rely on them. It's truly a partnership. We work hand in hand together and really rely on their guidance, their expertise, their know-how. You know, they're the ones who live there, work there, studied there. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about careers at the State Department, as we really work hand in hand with our local staff as well overseas. Domestically, the department consists of bureaus and offices. Some bureaus handle regional issues, such as the Bureau of African Affairs, and some focus on functional topics. An example of which is the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, or ECA, where I work. People-to-people exchange programs are at the heart of our work here in ECA, and they are a key component of U.S. foreign policy. Exchanges bring people together and provide a unique space for conversation, collaboration, and mutual understanding. Exchanges help policymakers work together towards common objectives, like promoting international cooperation, as well as diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and addressing climate change. They help the private sector innovate and come together around big ideas that advance economic prosperity for all. We'll talk more about international exchanges and our work here in ECA later on in the panel. Overseas, the Department of State advances American interests and protects U.S. citizens through embassies located in the capital of a foreign country and consulates located in other main cities. There are about 270 embassies and consulates in approximately 180 countries all around the world. The workforce of the department consists of Foreign Service, Civil Service, locally employed overseas staff, political appointees, and contract staff. Civil service personnel usually work domestically. Foreign service staff usually work overseas, though sometimes they do get posted to Washington, DC, and local staff are non-US, they're not American employees working at US embassies and consulates overseas. So we'll get into more of that in the panel. But all of that to say, just there's a lot of different pathways to careers at the State Department. And, I think in the past, the Foreign Service and the Civil Service were more separate tracks, but that's changing. Civil service now can do tours overseas, can work overseas, and Foreign Service, I think, more commonly work in DC as well. So we'll talk more about it, but just try to keep that in mind. There's lots of different pathways to careers at the State Department. The State Department offers great opportunities for a meaningful and fulfilling career, and we look forward to telling you more about these opportunities. We have a great panel today. Joining me today are Stephanie Jensby and John Leek. Stephanie is a Foreign Service officer with a career track in public diplomacy. She worked and lived in South America and Scandinavia prior to joining the Foreign Service. She's an abstract painter, an alumna of the Experiment in International Living, and adores cats. John is a Nestle-wide program alumnus and Pickering Fellow who completed a master's degree in Russian studies from Harvard University and will join the Department of State as a Foreign Service officer next fall. We'll each tell you a little bit about ourselves and our individual path leading to the State Department, and then we'll open it up to questions. So I hope that sounds good. I'll start just with my own story of how I got here. I was an English and Spanish major as an undergraduate, and I always wanted to go into publishing or journalism. I always thought that's the life for me. I'm going to live in New York. I'm going to work in publishing. That was the dream. So I had a couple of jobs, different jobs after undergraduate, working for different publishers, and I also spent a summer working at the Washington Post. But I wound up at a consulting firm. I was still doing editing and writing for them, but they worked with banks in Latin America. And I found myself very interested in the subject matter in economics. So I actually went back to graduate school and I got a degree in international economics. And from there, I still thought I was headed to New York, still thought I'm going to work in publishing in this very kind of niche, working with foreign affairs and banks and economics. But I ended up taking the Foreign Service exam and I passed it. And, I thought this is a pretty good gig. This sounds good. So I joined the Foreign Service and it was a good gig. It was terrific. I was in the Foreign Service for about 10 years. And then I converted to civil service. So I was in the Foreign Service, I was an economics officer. And when I converted to civil service, it was coming into ECA, into the Bureau where I am now. So I'm happy during our conversation to answer questions about both Foreign Service and civil service. Having done both, I have perspectives on both. When I was in the Foreign Service, I had postings in or on India, Afghanistan, the US mission to the United Nations, Germany, Sri Lanka, and UNICEF. And here in ECA, I've worked in a number of different offices in our policy office. We have a speaker program where we send speakers overseas to our embassies. And now, of course, with Nestle-Y, in our youth programs division, working with American high school students to send American high school students overseas to learn critical languages. So that's a bit about me. I'll turn it over now to Stephanie to tell us about her path at the State Department. Stephanie, over to you.
First technical glitch solved. I was on mute. I'll start again. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight, simply because you have an interest in international affairs, and I hope you find this session super helpful. My path into the Foreign Service was not direct. From undergraduate, I majored in anthropology, and I actually worked in the publishing arena for a couple of years in New York City for a few different publishing houses. And then I decided to go to graduate school, and I was primarily interested in program management, but program management from a non-governmental organization point of view. So after graduate studies, I did a practicum in Bolivia, working with an NGO that helped abandoned teenage mothers and their children. And then I just, through the internet search, came across a State Department and decided to give it a go. And lo and behold, I passed and I became an officer. And I chose public diplomacy because I thought it allowed my interest in a lot of different subjects to sort of come to bear within the public diplomacy lane. So I'm interested in healthcare programs, I'm interested in governance, I'm interested in education, and through cultural affairs and exchange programs, that those interests are met. I've traveled with my family overseas, my children have been educated overseas, we've adopted a cat overseas. All of this to say you can have whatever lifestyle you choose while working in the Foreign Service. And so over to you now, John.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you all. So I'm John. I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee. And I would say that my path to the State Department really began when I was in high school. So I did what's called the National Security Language Initiative for Youth program the summer after I graduated high school. So it's a program designed for high school students to learn less commonly taught languages. So languages like Arabic or Mandarin or Russian, for instance. I chose Russian because I had always had an interest in Russian history due to my great history teacher in high school. So every time Russia kind of was mentioned in class, I always perked up a little bit. And when I found out about Nisliwai, which I found out about just through reading my local paper, I decided to apply for Russian. So I was in a small city called Yaroslavl for 6 weeks, where I was learning elementary Russian, and I lived with a Russian host family. So after that, I started my freshman year at New York University, where I ended up majoring in history and minoring in Russian. And honestly, when I was in college, I thought that I was going to be an academic and be a professor because I really liked history. And I said, well, I'm going to teach Soviet history. But I really wasn't ready to make that commitment quite yet, right as I was graduating. And around that time, a recruiter from the State Department, they're called like diplomats in residence. They're posted at different universities across the country. And I met a diplomat in residence. She really promoted the career. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I think that's something I may like to do, but I'm not really sure. So after I graduated, I did what's called a Fulbright English teaching assistantship in Russia. So I was in a city called Kazan for a year, teaching English to university students. And it was that experience combined with also meeting some we call them like cultural affairs officers, who are diplomats focusing on cultural affairs, meeting them at our US Embassy in Moscow, really sort of pushed me to really consider the Foreign Service as a career. And while I was on my Fulbright, I found out about what's called the Thomas R. Pickering Foreign Affairs Fellowship. And this is a fellowship that is designed for, to increase diversity in the US Foreign Service in all forms. So it's ethnic diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity, geographic diversity. And essentially, the program provides funding for a 2-year master's degree. Sets you up with 2 internships with the State Department, one at the State Department headquarters in DC, and another at a US embassy or consulate overseas. And once you complete your graduate degree, the internships and the entry requirements for the Foreign Service, you are selected into the Foreign Service. So currently, I am pursuing my master's in Russian studies at Harvard. And this past summer, I was interning in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs in the Youth Programs Division. And I will be interning overseas this summer after I finish my master's, and then entering the Foreign Service next September. So I'm happy to talk more about fellowships at the State Department, internship opportunities, as well as college majors and academics as well. So looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm seeing there's a lot of questions in the chat, so this is so great. I'm gonna kick off the first question. I see there's a lot of questions about internships. And so I'll just, just say a few things about internships, but also say a few things about the programs in our Youth Programs Division. So there are a lot of internships available at the State Department. Some of them are paid, but that's a relatively new thing. So I have to say, I'm not sure what the details are on that. I'm sure we have a lot of good information on our website about it. But there are excellent internships. Actually, I just remember this, I was a State Department intern a million years ago. And I was actually an intern at our US Embassy in Lima. So there is also internships overseas. And there's also virtual internships through the Virtual Student Federal Service, VSFS. And I've worked with several of these virtual interns, and they are fantastic. They have, I have to say, the work that they do is really interesting, very dynamic. They're definitely part of the team. And they can do anything any of us do here at the State Department. So I really encourage you as well to look into that. But here within our Youth Programs Division at the State Department, these are fully funded programs that we offer for American high school students. The one that I work on is for students, like John mentioned, to go overseas and learn languages. And as he mentioned, there are languages that are not commonly taught here in the US. We have Chinese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Indonesian, Hindi, Turkish, Persian, and the students can choose between a summer program or a academic year program. But that's just one of our programs in the Youth Programs Division. There's a lot of different exchanges. So again, I just encourage you to check out exchanges. I think it's exchanges.gov, forgetting the exact address. But there's a lot of different opportunities within the State Department that are fully funded for students to go overseas, whether they're learning a language or they're just immersing in the culture, living with a host family. We have all types of different programs. So just very much encourage you to explore those on our website. And I think Stephanie, you're next for a question.
Yes, I'll answer the question. What level of education is needed for foreign service jobs? The minimum requirements are a high school education. You have to be at least 21 years old and no older than 59. And the age of 59 has a lot to do with being vested in your pension. So there's enough time for that. So the only limitation is, the age requirement in a high school diploma. But I would encourage, if you're not interested in pursuing higher education, but pursuing opportunities to engage in cross-cultural exchanges, practice interpersonal skills or build your interpersonal skills, practice public speaking, and prepare for the test. If you intend to take the test, to really prepare for it. And a lot of the jobs that I've held as a foreign service officer, I liken to an apprenticeship. You learn on the job anyway. So I think one of the major requirements would be for you to be open to learning new things and be willing to, live in a world of ambiguity for a little while as you're getting up to speed on your new role. but there are lots of people around you to help. We do have a training institute that will prepare you to some degree before you step into your first role, but a lot of it is on the job training. And with experience, of course, you get better at each job. Over to you, John.
Yeah, so there's a question from Lauren about remote internship opportunities. So I think that there's a link in the chat, but there's what's called the virtual student federal service like internships. They're like virtual ways in which you can virtually intern for the State Department or other government agencies while you're in school. So there's not a relocation commitment, and they also don't require you to have a security clearance to do them. So it's not as arduous as if you were going to intern in DC for the State Department, for instance. And I remember I had a friend in college that did multiple virtual internships with the State Department. She was interning, I think, at the US Embassy in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, and also for the US Embassy in Yerevan, Armenia as well. So that's an option to really look into for undergraduates and graduate students as well.
John, I'll just echo what you said. You know, when I was working in the speaker program, this is another part of ECA where we send speakers, US experts, to engage with audiences overseas. And it's a really terrific program. It's a really unique, I think, part of the State Department where they can convene these types of very open conversations on all different types of topics, you know, whether it's US elections or I worked with a lot of astronauts actually in that program. Astronauts were always very popular speakers at embassies overseas. But coming back to what John said, I worked on several programs where it was an intern who was actually running the program at the embassy, and it was a virtual intern because, you know, some of these programs were also virtual programs. So just, you know, again, something to think about, just a lot of really amazing opportunities that, that you might not ordinarily consider, you know, at the State Department. I did see a really excellent question in the chat about STEM careers at the State Department, and I wanted to talk about that one. I think a lot of people see the State Department as this kind of, you know, monolithic organization that only does foreign policy. And of course we do foreign policy, but it's actually a huge organization that does a lot of different things, lots of different functions, roles, responsibilities, lots of different topics that we work on. And one of them is STEM. STEM, I think, is part of our lives in so many different ways all across the State Department. We have an entire bureau that's just dedicated to oceans and environment and science, and a lot of scientists working over there. There's an Office of Space Policy over there that I worked with quite a bit when I was in the speaker program. But also here in ECA, we do a lot of STEM-related programs. We do a lot of tech-related programs. And again, these are places where people can share their expertise, that Americans and people all around the world are coming together through these programs to share expertise, to come up with ideas, to meet each other. And it's again, just a very unique part of the State Department and where all of these things can overlap and intersect. Foreign policy, STEM, people-to-people exchanges, having fun. That's a key part of our programs as well. But it's an excellent question. And again, just something to think about, that the State Department is a really diverse organization. We do a lot of different things, and STEM intersects in so many areas of our work here. We even have a new bureau for cybersecurity that, you know, is heavily drawing on those types of expertise. So again, just something to think about with the State Department. Stephanie, over to you.
Sure. There's a question from Adam regarding what sort of work in information technology is available at the State Department. And just it's sort of along the same lines of what Molly was saying. There are multiple types of opportunities, and we do have information technology scientists that work in Washington, D.C. as well as abroad, because of course we're going to need our computers serviced. We also have I believe they're called engineering security officers that work on the classified side of our information wheelhouse. So there are lots of opportunities to engage in IT, stateside as well as overseas. And I'm not sure if this falls into what Adam was thinking about, but for example, I work with the Bureau of Global Public Affairs, the Bureau of Global Public Affairs. And I am a strategic media analyst, currently working as a strategic media analyst, monitoring and measuring how Share America, which is the department's platform to share stories about American culture and our policy issues. But my job is to measure how these stories are performing. And so as the analyst, I'm in one lane, but we have an entire team that's on the back end that's working on our site, on our Google Analytics metrics site, and have actually built a bespoke database for us. So, you know, there are many opportunities to engage in the computer field within the State Department. John?
So there's a question about are youth exchanges covered by parents, or are they covered by the program? So the youth exchanges are free. So they're funded congressionally. And when I did the NISLY program, I only had to pay for medical fees associated with getting a medical examination for medical clearance and fees for getting my passport updated. So other than those two things, the program is completely funded. So cost is never an obstacle for having an opportunity to do a State Department exchange program.
I'll jump in. I'm seeing some questions in the chat about different, you know, and these are such great questions about what are the different areas, you know, is this available at the State Department? Is this available at the State Department? So I just wanted to say there's a really fantastic office here in ECA that does do arts programming. That was a very good question in the chat. We do send artists overseas, we send musicians overseas through these exchange programs, and also bring artists and musicians here to the US. And, you know, it's really interesting because when things are tough between two countries, as sometimes happens, one area where we can always still talk to each other is the arts. So it's a really critical program, and it's really interesting how, you know, when things get tough, you think that there would be like the red phone and you know, that type of stuff. But no, it's like they're going to go see music, and then they can talk to each other and have that space and have an opening there, you know, for conversation and for you know, a more stable relationship, hopefully in the long run. So we do a lot of arts programming. There's also a embassy at the an office at the State Department called Arts and Embassies, and they have in our ambassadors' residences all over the world and in embassies, we do have art. We showcase art of American artists. That's another terrific office within the State Department, and one people might not think about. And there was another question about medical, like are there medical careers in the State Department? Yes, we have an entire bureau of our medical bureau. We have doctors at embassies all over the world to, you know, there for our American staff. But also, you know, during COVID, just a great example of the role of our medical offices is, you know, they really helped set the guidelines for the department. So it's just, again, these things you might not think about, but are very critical to our work at the State Department. Lots of different roles and responsibilities. And Stephanie, back to you.
Sure. I would encourage everyone to take a look at careers.state.gov. I believe there's a quiz on that site that will sort of give you a glimpse into the different opportunities available along the 5 Foreign Service officer career tracks. And there are, I believe, 19 or 20 Foreign Service specialist tracks. And being a medical provider is one of the specialist tracks, but there are also other technologically focused specialist duties there, as well as facilities, general services, and other items. So if one is not too keen on the foreign policy aspect, but would still like to contribute to the State Department, you can do it through a variety of ways. Okay, I'm going to hunt for a question. John, maybe you would like to go while I'm looking to answer a question.
So there's a question about how to prepare for the Foreign Service Officer test. So you can learn more about the process of entering the Foreign Service on careers.state.gov. It's a very long process, but as far as the written examination, some of the best advice that I got about preparing for the exam was from a State Department recruiter. And she said that you should read the newspaper every day so that you're up to date on world events. You should write something at least every week, whether that's just like journaling or writing an essay or like an op-ed, for instance. And then you should do something once a year that takes you out of your comfort zone. So that could be learning a foreign language, or going abroad through like the Peace Corps or Fulbright, or just volunteering. And through those experiences, you kind of gain cumulative knowledge, and that sort of sets you up to perform well during the Foreign Service exams. I actually took the Foreign Service exam twice, once when I was in college, and then again in graduate school. So a lot of people don't pass on their first time, and that's okay. But if you keep doing those things to sort of build your knowledge and build your experience, the test will become, I guess, easier or more manageable.
Stephanie, shall I see a good question here that I can address.
Well,
there's a question. Or go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So Charlotte has a question about languages. If you haven't already studied languages, are there opportunities to gain those skills on the job? And the answer is yes. The vast majority of Foreign Service officers will have at least one long-term language training opportunity before going overseas. It's usually for consular work. If you study a hard language such as Chinese or Russian or Arabic, you are probably going to spend more than 2 years in a country in which those languages are spoken, because it takes you quite a while to learn those languages. So of course the department would like to utilize that skill gained. So there are opportunities to study foreign languages prior to going overseas. And if you're still interested in picking up another language, we do have the option of taking courses through our Foreign Service Institute on a virtual level. So you can continue your study through the Foreign Service Institute virtually as well. I hope that answered the question for you.
So there's a question about what is an ideal undergraduate major to become a Foreign Service officer. So I would say that there is no ideal major. Study what you love. And I think that whatever passion you have will sort of come through in the process of becoming a foreign service officer. Don't study something just because you think it will lead to this specific career, or will lead to the foreign service. Like I was a history major, and so I was a little apprehensive that I wouldn't be a great candidate for the foreign service. But I think that my passion for like history and culture really showed through. Yeah, major in whatever you want.
John, I think that's such a great point, and I want to really emphasize that point as well. Just to say that there's so many different paths that people have taken to get to the State Department, and that is such a benefit to our organization because everyone brings a different background, a different skill set, different experience, different perspective with them. And, you know, unfortunately, there's just no shortage of crises in our world. And when you're in a crisis, it's really important to have people who have different skills and different strengths. And I really believe that it's great to have this team of people who have different backgrounds, different skills, different strengths. And when you come together to solve something, that's the way you want to do it, to have people who have done different things and they're bringing that experience with them. So I just really want to emphasize that point. There's no one way. And I know someone had asked earlier about qualifications or age ranges. And in my class, when I started in the Foreign Service, we had 2 people in the class who had a high school degree, but they were very successful entrepreneurs. So they had amazing skills. And we also had one 59-year-old person who had been a superintendent of schools. So this was her second career, maybe even third or fourth career. But all of that to say, you know, these people had such different skill sets and brought them with them that then we were so lucky to get them, you know, at the State Department. So, you know, again, just saying lots of different ways to get here. I see a lot of questions in the chat too about law enforcement, overlap with state troopers or law enforcement. And I wanted to mention that we do have a Bureau of Diplomatic Security at the State Department. And this bureau does all kinds of things. Of course, they provide security for our high-level visitors to the department. They also ensure our security at our embassies overseas. But they also do investigations. So there is a bit of a law enforcement function there in terms of their work, but they are not law enforcement officers. They are actually foreign service officers, but within diplomatic security. So, and I'm sure there's civil service positions there as well, but they are in the Foreign Service also. So I'm sorry, that's probably not the clearest explanation, but there are certain functions at the State Department where there is some overlap, but they're not law enforcement officers. Also, somebody had asked about psychology, and I wanted to mention we do have an office that does provide mental health support for employees. And I am not remembering the exact name of the office, but especially during COVID, I have to say this office was amazing, just went above and beyond. And as well for like post-traumatic, like after the evacuation of Afghanistan, for example, the office provides really critical support. So that's just something as well to keep in mind. There is a really just fantastic office of professionals at the State Department dedicated to that. So again, just so many different functions at the State Department and things to think about. And I think Stephanie, back.
Sure. There are also opportunities to work as a regional psychologist or a regional psychiatrist. And by that, I mean, you would be stationed in one of the larger cities in a region and provide services to the American officers at posts within that region. So, for example, when I did my consular work in Lima, Peru, we had a regional psychiatrist who is based in La Paz, Bolivia, come to visit us and to talk to us because, or allow us the opportunity to talk to him, I should say, because in consular services, you're working on visas, whether they're non-immigrant visas or immigrant visas, fraud prevention issues, but you're also helping American citizens. And sometimes you are helping to repatriate a body because an American citizen has died in country. And depending on the circumstances, they can be quite traumatic. It's a very heavy workload, and it can be you can need to talk to someone. So if you would like to serve as that sort of support system for officers posted overseas, there's that opportunity as well. John or Molly?
So there was a question about the Pickering Fellowship. So I'll say that the Pickering Fellowship is one of many fellowships within the State Department. So for the Foreign Service, there's what's called the Thomas R. Pickering Fellowship, and there's also the Charles B. Rangel Fellowship. And then there's also what's called the Donald M. Payne Fellowship, which is for Foreign Service officers who work for the U.S. Agency for International Development. And there's also a fellowship for a Foreign Affairs Information Technology Fellowship for those who will work as IT specialists overseas at U.S. embassies. And there's also efforts in the department to start programs that are designed to increase diversity within the civil service and within the diplomatic security as well. So for the Pickering Fellowship, there was, can we apply if we are in high school or do we need to be in college? So you need to be in college, and the earliest that you're eligible to apply is during your senior year of college. And you have to be applying to go to graduate school for the next academic year, but you can also apply anytime, so long as you don't have a master's degree, you can apply at any time. So a lot of people take time off and work abroad or get work experience in another industry and then apply for the fellowship. I would say probably in my cohort, there's about half who are coming like straight from undergrad and half who had taken time off. And there's more detailed information on their website, which is in the link below in the chat.
There's so many great questions in the chat. I'm trying to condense a few. I am seeing some questions about the program that John did and that I'm working on, the National Security Language Initiative for Youth. So I just want to repeat what John said is please check out the website. We did just finish the application period for next year. But as I mentioned before, there are summer programs and academic year programs. So please keep it in mind. Like I said, the students live with a host family. The normal program for the summer and academic year, there's all different ranges. People can be beginners or not even have studied the language before, or they can be fairly, proficient in the language. There's different levels that students can enter into. We also have a program that's entirely virtual. It's called Virtual Nestle Y. And this is a 10-week online program. And for this program is for pure beginners. Like if you've never even heard the language, this is the program for you. Hopefully after doing Virtual Nestle Y, it might make you more curious about other programs within ECA or Nestle Y. So we just really encourage you to explore the website and consider those programs. I also saw a good question about intelligence. Are there roles for the intelligence community at the State Department? That is a definite yes. There's a Bureau of Intelligence and Research, I think it's called, INR, we call it. I think it's Intelligence and Research. I love them. I'm a huge fan. They do amazing presentations. They have amazing research. They really, dig into the issues. If you're somebody who really loves research and analysis, and exploring these types of ideas and putting it all together, that is the place for you. I also saw a really good question about what other types of foreign policy jobs are there across government. And I just wanted to emphasize there are so many different types of foreign policy jobs in the federal service. The State Department is just one agency that works on that works on foreign policy. Of course, we think we're the the number one of the foreign policy agencies, and in a way we are, of course. But there's a lot of work going on across government. Department of Commerce, U.S. Aid, U.S. Trade Representative. It really depends on your interests. If you're interested in foreign policy and trade, foreign policy and development, really just try to explore jobs across government, because for sure, no matter what the function is, there is an international component to it. Everything is definitely connected. There's even smaller agencies, that people might not have heard about, like the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, that works with businesses in the United States to open up opportunities for them overseas. EXIM, the Export-Import Bank, although I think it has a different name now, it's been renamed. But there's just lots of different opportunities all across government for international work. So yeah, please keep that in mind and explore. A nice place to explore these types of jobs is USA Jobs. If you set up an account there and just search around, you'll get a sense for what types of jobs are out there, what types of agencies there are that do international work. But I highly encourage you to do that. If you are interested in international work, check out USA Jobs. It's the federal job site. Okay, Stephanie, over to you again.
Sure. There's a question about what are the complications with living in a foreign country? And I think that's a great question because it will challenge your thinking. If you're concerned with certain things, such as adequate health care, drinking water, roads, the condition of roads, sidewalks. Do you have sidewalks? Do you run out of sidewalks? What's the traffic pattern like? And if you answer some of those questions, based on, if you find the answers to those questions for the country you're interested in, and based on those responses, if it's too much for you to handle, it gives you a good indication, I think, if you will have difficulty adjusting to life in the foreign service. I have lived in countries in which there have not been sidewalks, or you've run out of sidewalk and you are in a very heavy flow of traffic. I have been in countries where I've had to have emergency surgery, and our medical doctor said it was not allowed, and I had to be medevac to Florida, only to be sent back to the country, then finally be allowed to have the surgery to remove my gallbladder in country. So you can have, complex medical issues, dental issues. So there are some challenges. If you have children and your children have special needs, you could have challenges with having them educated at the international school or the American school if they do not support education for students with special needs. It can be challenging for other reasons. For example, if you are someone who likes to have a very active social life and you happen to be in a country in which the social life is quite limited, that could be a complication or a challenge for you. But for the most part, I think all of those challenges can be met and to be met with success. It's just a matter of how you approach your situation going into your new foreign country. It's going to be different than the United States, and there's a great community to help you and ease into your new environment. But yes, there are complications, but you can work through them is what I'd like to offer. I'm not sure, Molly, if you've had those experiences, but life happens everywhere and you figure out how to deal with it.
No, I think that's a great point, Stephanie, what you opened with, of just how it really kind of challenges your perspective on things. And I think, John, you mentioned this earlier on too, about getting out of your comfort zone. I thought that advice from your professor was so good. It really does. It does get you out of your comfort zone, but in a good way. I mean, it definitely challenges you, but it it's life-changing, that's for sure. Yeah.
There was a question about Fulbright, but I can't find the exact wording. But I can talk about Fulbright. So with Fulbright, generally it's generally like a post college type of experience. So there are sort of two tracks that you can do within Fulbright. There's what's called the English teaching assistantship. And then there's what's called like research grants as well. There's also programs in which you can get like a master's, but generally most countries fall within either teaching English overseas or doing research for a year overseas. So I did like in the English teaching assistantship in Russia, and the process was probably about maybe 8 months or so of applying, just getting personal statements together, doing an interview at like the semifinalist stage. I remember for Russia, like we had to do our semifinalist interview in Russian because it had one of the most like, this is one of the harder like language requirements before being accepted into the program. I will say that one thing that can help when applying for any of these State Department internships or fellowships or study abroad opportunities is to use your university's Office of Scholarships and Global Awards. Most colleges and universities have someone on campus that can help you with applications to these competitive programs. And generally, it's good because you can show them a full draft of a statement of purpose, for instance, and they can give you feedback on it, and you can show them multiple drafts, and that sort of makes your application stronger. So for those of you in high school now and college now, you find someone on campus or an advisor that can really help you make those applications the strongest that they can be.
I'll jump in. I'm seeing, I again, just want to condense a few questions here. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about how can I learn more? And I want to encourage people to follow our social media. And whether it's through ECA, the ECA channels or the Department of State channels, please follow our social media. You'll learn so much about our work, about what the day-to-day is, the types of things that we're focusing on, where our attention is these days. And I'll give one example. They're doing some really nice short videos right now of Secretary Blinken, our Secretary of State. And I think it's called like Walks with Tony or Talks with Tony, something like that. But he goes into different offices and chats with people. And it's a really great little window into his day, into our day here at the State Department. He also has a funny video. He had worked at the State Department a long time ago, and his first office, you know, at that time, was actually a closet. It was like a converted closet. And he, in one of these videos, he goes back into his old closet, now a Secretary of State, and, you know, kind of reminisces in the closet. Yes, my desk was here and I could barely move, you know, that type of thing. But the videos are really good. He also talked to our Office of Interpretation, the diplomatic interpreters. So just a lot of great stuff on our social media. And I really encourage you to follow it. Every office and bureau, or every bureau anyway, and embassies all around the world will all have their own social media channels. So if you're interested in a specific region, look up that bureau, look up that region. Like I said, ECA has our own social media, but you know, it's a great way to learn about the department and our work. I also saw a good question about interaction with politicians, and I wanted to talk about that. We do have political appointees at the State Department and all around the world, at our embassies all around the world. And we do get a lot of questions about that. What's it like to work with different administrations? And I've been at the State Department now for a long time. I've worked for both Republican and Democratic administrations. And I just really wanted to emphasize that our work goes on, no matter what administration we're in. The State Department is an institution, and we serve the American people. And that's something that we really believe very strongly in. And at the State Department, we are serving the American people. We're serving our institutions. We're serving the Constitution. So just things to keep in mind, no matter what, those things don't change under any administration. And we always want the same things, right? We want peace, we want prosperity, we want a stable world. Those things don't change either, no matter what administration we're under. But it is a good question. I think people often wonder, what's it like when an administration changes? So thank you for that question. And maybe we have time for one more question. We're coming up on our hour here. Stephanie or John, do you want to jump in with one last question?
Maybe John, since he's, someone who served as an intern and he's about to become a Foreign Service officer.
Sure. So I can just say that I would encourage all of you to intern for the State Department. I think that it's a very dynamic place in which to work. It's a very huge place. So there's lots of different things going on at a lot of different times, lots of different issues. I can say that this summer I learned so much, interning in ECA, not just about ECA itself, but how ECA works with other bureaus in the State Department, and also meeting people that were working in other issues in other bureaus as well. And I'll say that one thing about the State Department is that everyone works really, really hard because they really believe in what they're doing on behalf of the American people, on the behalf of peace and prosperity. So I think it's a great place to work. And I think if you want to see that, you should definitely intern and see what it's like up close.
Thank you, John. I think that's a great note to end on. I'll just say again, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, John. And thank you all for joining us. This was a really great conversation, really terrific questions in the chat. And again, just want to echo John, think about it. Think about that internship and follow our social media. Seriously, it's a great resource. All right, well, I think we'll sign off. It's 8 o'clock. Thanks again, and take care, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.